Okay. So we've talked about buttons, we've talked about the POV, and now there's one more thing on the joystick. Any ideas what it might be?
The actual joystick.
The actual joysticks. There's actually something else besides the actual joysticks, though.
Triggers.
The triggers fall into this category as well. Anybody know what the term is for all that?
Sliders?
They might be called sliders in some places. They are not called sliders in this context. Starts with an A. They are. It's a term you may not have heard before. It is called. They are called the axes, or a single axis. So an axis is pretty special compared to these other ones, right? With a button, you had true or false. With the POV, you had these whole numbers, these integers. For an axis, you're going to get a range of values spanning between -1 and +1. Well, how many numbers are between -1 and +1? -1, 0, +1. But here's the thing. It's not -1 and +1. It's -1.0 and +1.0. So really, it's not 3 numbers. It's an infinity of numbers. More accurately, it's about 2 to the 64th numbers, give or take. And so what it is, it's a full range of motion where 0 is at rest, 1 is all the way forward, -1 is all the way reversed, and then every number in between is there. So what are some numbers between 0 and 1?
1.2. No.
No.
That's too big.
0.2.
That's also too big.
0.2.
0.2
Yeah.
is in there. 0.5 is in there.
I got it.
0.1, 0.25697385.
Yeah.
Literally 0 point anything would be between 0 and 1. And then between 0 and -1, you've also got -0.3, negative.
0.2598.
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of numbers there. And those numbers are corresponding to kind of how hard you're pressing, right? If you press it 25% of the way, 0.25. If you press it 25% of the way the other way, -0.25. So these are what we call floating point numbers. Or you'll hear them called real numbers. They're actually real. Yeah, they're not ints. And so when you see the term real, just know that in programming that means we're talking about a number that can have a decimal. So axes are measured in real numbers. So for bools, for true false, we had booleans for buttons. We had ints for integers. For reals, we have what are called doubles. You might ask why double? Well, in the older days, we had things called floats, because floating point numbers, and a double has twice the memory of a float, so it's called a double. So again, these are all going to be variables. They're going to hold stuff in memory. They're all going to be a place in memory, but they all have different shapes and sizes. So let's talk about how we'll get an axis. The first question is, what axis do we start with?
Joystick.
We can start with a joystick. So that brings us to an interesting topic that we didn't talk about. A joystick, these thumb joysticks on the gamepad, is actually 2 axes. Right? The joystick has a left and right axis, and it has an up and down axis. So that's why you can move it left and right, up and down independently. And each one of those has a different number. So if we look in Driver Station, let's go Windows, let's go to Driver Station, let's go to the pads. If I move this left joystick up, I can see that axis 1 is moving a lot. If I move it side to side, I can see that axis 0 is moving a lot. So right away that tells me that this axis is axis 0 and this axis is axis 1. But there's a a joystick on the right side of it as well. What numbers do you get for left and right on that joystick? Looking at driver station. If you move the right joystick side to side, which axis moves?
R, X, and R1.
And what are their numbers?
Negative 1 to 1.
No, which number is the axis?
Oh, 4.
4 for left and right, and
5 for
5 for up and down. So we got that. So 4 for left and right, 5 for up and down. Well, we skipped 2 and 3. Because as it turns out, you've got your right trigger and your left trigger. Your left trigger is axis 2, and your right is trigger 3.
These are not mechanical triggers.
Say again?
These are not mechanical triggers.
They're pretty mechanical, right?
No, there's different types of triggers. You have mechanical ones, which are Boolean triggers,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have non-mechanical triggers, which are...
Right, yeah. So these are non-mechanical in that sense then because they have that range of motion. Now, one thing to notice on driver station, let's look at their values real quick so we can get a feel for that. When I do the triggers, do they ever go negative?
No.
No. So the trigger axes are just between
0.
0 and 1. 0 and 1 are the values you get for the left trigger and for the right trigger. So we'll make a note of that. 0 to 1, 0 to 1. Now for the left joystick side to side. If you push it to the left, it goes negative. If you push it to the right, it goes positive. Same thing for the right joystick. So you know that left is -1, right is +1. But what do you notice about the up and down?
Down is positive 1, and up is negative 1.
Why is that backwards? Any guesses?
Because normally when you're playing games and you pull down, you normally want your character to look up and sometimes.
And even older games, what was a very popular type of game were flight simulators. And before flight simulators, you had airplanes and helicopters.
And you pull back on the stick to pull
Pull,
up.
so yeah, so
That's what I was going to say.
so the joystick up and down being backwards is a holdover from flight sims, which is a holdover from actual flight.
I was going to say that, but then I thought it probably wasn't right.
So keep that in mind that, because if you ever look at a graph in math, right, it's positive on the right and positive up. On the joysticks, it's backwards. And so that's something that's going to be important to know. So if we go back to Windows and we look in, I'm going to kill my simulation so I don't get the problem I've had before. I'm going to close that, close that. Let's grab a value. So we need a variable. How do we get a variable? What kind of variable do we need?
An axis variable.
Well, what kind of number does an axis give us? It gives us a double because it's a real. So double. And which axis do we want to get for starting? Would be an easy one to do.
0.
Well, which one's 0?
X axis on the.
Yeah, so we'll call that left stick X. And so this is an important note here is we could have called this axis 0, but then you have to remember later what axis 0 is. So we want to give the variable a useful name. What's up?
My controller's broken. This is the POV button.
That means you probably, do you have X on the back?
Oh, I had the mode pressed. There we go.
That'll do it, yeah. So yeah, on the joysticks, you'll make sure you're in X and you don't have mode pressed. It'll flip it. All right, so we got double left stick X, then what? Equals, so it can get a value. Where is it getting the value from?
My joystick.
My joystick. And we need to use a method, which means we need to use dot. Now for the method. For the button, we had all those get button methods. For axes, there's one useful one. It's called get raw axis. Now, what was the A button's index? What number did we use for the A button? Buttons start at 1. Axes don't start at 1. Axes start at 0. Index, not value. Yeah. So we got the value. We've put it into left stick. Now we need to put it on the dashboard. So we're going to go Smart Dashboard and dot. So we're going to put something. What are we putting? What kind of value are we putting?
Number.
It's a number, so it's going to be put number. Then we got to give it a key, and this is, we said, left stick X. And we got the value there. So we'll take that, and we'll sim it. WPILib, simulate robot code. Sim GUI, use real driver station, okay. Simulation's running, and there is my value. And you can see it moves between 0 and 1 when I push it to the right, 0 to -1 when I push it to the left. Now, hopefully, I'm not going to see anything too significantly different from what's happening in driver station since they're reading the same value. Now, driver station you'll see is actually rounding it to 2 decimal places, so there will be a little bit of a difference. It may just be truncating it, but they're going to be probably within 1/100th of each other.
Well, it keeps on saying build fail.
All right, let's see what. And because it's still put number, it's still going to be the same kind of things we could have done with the other one, so we're not going to spend too much time on that. But yeah, those are the 3 kinds of things you can read off of a joystick. You can get your button presses, you can get your POV values, and you can get your axis values. Any questions about working with a joystick? One thing I will point out is there's actually a lot more things you can read off of a joystick. It'll check, is the axis greater than a certain value? It'll check, is it less than a certain value? You can find out how many axes you have, how many buttons you have. You can also read which way are you pushing a joystick. Now, one of the problems with this is these methods are in here for any kind of joystick. That includes these game pads. It also includes the big flight stick joysticks like are on that shelf back there. There are some things that you can really only do with that. For example, there's this get X, get Y, get Z. There's not an X, Y, and Z on this kind of joystick. There are X, Y, and Z on that kind of joystick. Those are different axes. So those are different ways to go about it. We'll probably see more of those when we get to them if they become relevant. Any questions on joysticks? Okay, I'm going to stop that.